Cool. All right, so today we're talking about the history of yoga, which is some super interesting stuff. And I am going to start by sharing. Well, actually, I'm not going to share just yet. Hold on. We'll get to that. I've got stuff to share, but so yeah, yoga. Where does yoga come from? Anybody want to take a guess? Or does anybody have some idea? What part of the world? We have an idea about that, right, Caleb?
India.
Yeah, from what's now known as India. Absolutely. How old is yoga?
I'll guess 2,000 years.
That's a good guess. It's kind of a trick question because we don't really actually know. We have some guesses. We don't know for sure. Origins of something as old as yoga are hazy because it developed so long ago. And it kind of is like one of those things where you're like, well, did it develop in one place? Did it develop in different places and then come together and then go back apart? You know, maybe in several places during the same era where different traditions came together and formed this practice. But it is widely believed now by scholars that yoga originated in India somewhere around 5,000 years ago. And these are like the early roots of yoga. This 5,000 years ago yoga doesn't look very much like a vinyasa yoga class. But what we practice now, it has these roots. It came from this long evolution. So in the early 1920s, archaeologists discovered a civilization called the Indus-Sarasvati civilization. All right, so here's where I'll share, if I can pull this up. Just a little map for you here. Oh, here's my map. Oh gosh, okay, sorry. Hang on one sec, guys. There it is. Now, will you share it, Zoom? Let's see. There we go. This is a map of the Indus Valley. They call it the Indus Valley civilization. And this is what they now call it the Indus-Sarasvati civilization. And we know that this culture extended over an area of about 300,000 square miles. So this would be like the size of Texas and Ohio combined. It was the largest civilization of its era. And excavating the ruins, the researchers found depictions engraved on soapstone seals that strongly resemble yogi-like figures. And here's one of those seals. This is called the Pashupati seal. So this was found in the ruins of that civilization. And you can see, right, he looks like he's sitting in or he or she, it doesn't really say, but it looks like they are sitting in a yoga pose. It's called the Pashupati seal. So this was a highly developed culture they discovered with infrastructure such as things like sewage systems that were not rivaled by anything until the Romans later on. Multi-story buildings, advanced building techniques. And the current research on it shows they used to think that the decline of this civilization was because of these like warrior-like people called the Aryans to the north came and like took them over and annihilated them. But what actually, now they think that it happened because of a major tectonic shift, a major tectonic event that changed the geography and caused the Sarasvati River to dry up. So the Indus River and the Sarasvati River went through the Indus Valley here. And when the Sarasvati River dried up, then the civilization couldn't thrive. So anyway, this river is widely mentioned in like one of the oldest yogic texts called the Rig Veda. So anyway, for you history buffs there. So it's old stuff, right? And we're still learning new things about all of these old things because it's, you know, we're learning through things like archaeology. It wasn't all written down. What we do know is that Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism were all given rise from this culture. So yeah, that's somehow we ended up on this Zoom call, all because of that, right? Now the history of yoga can be divided into like 4 general categories. Vedic yoga, that's the oldest stuff, that Indus Sarasvati civilization stuff, pre-classical yoga, classical yoga, and post-classical yoga. That's kind of how it's divided. And those things are known by their literature. So the early yogic literature, such as the Rig Veda and the Upanishads, those are really spiritual in nature. And it's not till we get to the classical period of yoga, which started around the 2nd century AD, that the asana even gets mentioned. And it's really then just in passing in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. So we'll talk about that when we discuss true yoga. And it's not really until the post-classical era that yogis get really interested in the potential of the human body and their pursuit of liberation. So prior to that, yogic practices have been focused more on transcending the physical realms through ritual and or meditation. So the new focus on spiritual connection with physical or like manifest form created the path for modern yoga as we know it now. Because most of us, we come to the practice through the practice of asana. All right, so now I'll share another screen with you. Hang on, I thought I had all of my screens up. And now I don't know where they all went. Let's see. Okay, there it is. Here, I'll mute for you in just a moment. Okay. Thanks you guys for being patient with me here. There it is. Okay, modern yoga timeline. So this is kind of just a few important things that happened that brought yoga to the West. So our first appearance of yoga in the US is that in 1893, a man named Swami Vivekananda spoke at the World Parliament of Religions. And people were like, they were like really intrigued by him. He was really eloquent, I guess. And, you know, he spoke about yoga in such a way that people got interested. So that was the first appearance that we know of yoga in the US. And it kind of piqued people's interest in yoga. But then it wasn't until 1920 that Paramahansa Yogananda arrived in Boston. So if you've ever read or heard of the book Autobiography of a Yogi, that comes from Yogananda. And then we're going to skip forward. So we have long spans of time here. In 1947, Indra Devi, she was a Russian-born yogini. And she was the first woman to study with Krishnamacharya. opened a studio in Hollywood. And then yoga started to get kind of popular with celebrities and like the really wealthy and the who's who in Hollywood. And that was a major turning point, really, because number one, I think because she was female, honestly. She was one of the first like really known female teachers of asana. Until then, most of the teachers were men, and they were mostly Indian men. And she was Russian. And although she had a really international life, she's actually still alive. She's in her 90s and she lives in Argentina, I believe, and still practices and teaches. And also because it started to really get popular, because, you know, when celebrities get into stuff, then, you know, the general public starts to get into those things as well. And then some other events that happened were that in 1965, a man named Srila Prabhupada came to New York, and he started the Bhakti Yoga movement known as ISKCON, or the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. Now, they're not very asana focused, they're a Bhakti Yoga practice, but you've probably heard of them because they were popularized by their main mantra is called the Maha Mantra, and it was popularized by the Beatles. It's Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So the Beatles have that mantra in their music and some of their recorded music, and they performed. They brought them into like their realm. They did performances with them and stuff like that. And I think there's George Harrison is on one of the International Society of Krishna Consciousness albums as well. In '69, Yogi Bhajan started teaching Kundalini Yoga in the US. So if you've ever taken a Kundalini Yoga class, they do asana, but it's a very, very different form of asana. Has anybody ever taken a Kundalini class? Lots of repetitive movements. They call them kriyas, and they're like these like repetitive movements. Like you might be like, you know, and you do them for like sometimes, you know, 20 minutes or something like that. It's almost the mind over matter thing. But there's a whole science behind it, and they also do a lot of mantra meditation and other practices. 71, Bikram Chaudhry arrived in the US and started popularizing hot yoga. Pattabhi Jois came in 75. So really in the, you know, in the 60s and 70s, really, it just started to like snowball in the US where like there's more and more and more. And 75, this one is relevant to us. This one's probably the most relevant to us because Pattabhi Jois, who was also a student of Krishnamacharya along with Indra Devi, arrived in the US, and he started to popularize a style of asana called Ashtanga Vinyasa. And that is going to lay the groundwork for like what we're doing now, the Cambio Vinyasa sequence. And other things, you know, in the 70s and 80s, Bhagavan Rajneesh, otherwise known as Osho, he's a pretty controversial figure. Actually, several of these are very controversial figures. Started many ashrams and centers in the US. And then I just also wanted to give a mention to the Dalai Lama, a Nobel Peace Prize winner. I'm sure you've all heard of him. Because, as I mentioned, Tibetan Buddhism, you know, these roots gave rise to Buddhism, Hinduism, Jainism, and Tibetan Buddhism is a form of Tantra Yoga. So just to kind of give you the idea that yoga is a really big umbrella, and it is very much like a tree, right? So it has all these roots, and you know, it has come together and it's gone apart, and there are branches and there are off branches and there are offshoots of those and offshoots of those and offshoots of those. So it's huge. And that's why these practices can look so different from place to place. So there's all kinds of different things going on here. And this I didn't post in your classroom because I just made it today. But if you guys want, I can still post it. All right, so that was a whole bunch of presentation and information. What questions do you guys have or comments?
Could you go over the 4 stages again?
Sure. Here, I tell you what, I'll put them in the chat. So, and you know, I don't have the years right in front of me. These are sort of the let's see, these are like the 4 times. So eras, the 4 eras, I would say, of yoga. So we have Vedic, pre-classical. This is kind of how scholars outline the history of yoga. Classical, post-classical, and then of course now we have modern, so that would be us now. So Vedic, pre-classical, classical, post-classical, and modern. And these eras are typically known by the literature that comes from them, and a lot of that literature, it was written in Sanskrit, and but there are, oh, sorry, that one just, I think that just went to Kauri. Sorry, Kauri's like, why am I just getting this? All right, let's send this to everybody. All right, there you go. So yeah, it's defined by literature. Like the Rig Veda, for example, comes from the Vedic period. The Upanishads, if you've heard of any of these texts, come from the pre-classical era. And in the classical era, we have things like the Yoga Sutras. Yeah, so there's all kinds of, you know, these are classic texts. And of course, now there's lots of modern texts of yoga, and there are many modern interpretations of the classical texts. So really the one that we study in this training is the Yoga Sutras. So we get really an introduction to the Yoga Sutras in the book True Yoga. It really is just an introduction. It's like everything you learn in yoga is like a giant rabbit hole. And you're like, wow, this, and you're like, oh, I learned this little bit. And then if you keep looking down that hole, it just starts branching out and getting more and more. So what we study in True Yoga are the 8 limbs of yoga, which is part of the Yoga Sutras. And even though it is a really important concept that's brought up in the Yoga Sutras, there's a lot more in the Yoga Sutras. It's like one part of one chapter, one of 4 chapters. Yeah. What other questions or comments do you guys have? Did you know that it was this old? You know, went back this far? Ish, right. Like a lot of times we have this idea that it's ancient, that it's, you know, that it goes back, that it has this history, but we mostly don't really know what it is. We kind of have this vague idea about ancient India, but at the time that it was, you know, developed, it really wasn't. It wasn't known as India. Again, it was that Indus Saraswati civilization that it came from. All right, so let's talk about, and I'm kind of interested to know, now I remember Trinidad, you mentioned that you started practicing hot yoga. What kind of yoga, do you know what kind of yoga you might have practiced first?
The first one?
Or just it's a question for everybody. Like was your first experience with yoga, do you think it was vinyasa, or, you know, was it? Yeah, you could put it in the chat box if you want, or you can unmute and tell us. Hot yoga and vinyasa, Ashtanga, okay. Great. I know, I think some of you mentioned that when we started talking about, you know, yesterday, yin, flow, restorative. Okay. Cool. So yeah, you can see, and now I'll share another screen, or I'll attempt to. So you can see here, if we look at this yoga family tree. I wish I could make it bigger. I cannot see. Can I make it bigger? There we go. Okay. So this is, and this is not even fully comprehensive. This is just, I like the visual of it because it's kind of pretty. And I did post this in Classroom so you can see it. I did not make this. This is from Yoga Journal. But you can see, like, you know, here's some of these historical things that happened in the trunk. And then here's some branches of, and these are just the ways that yoga has come. These are just ways yoga has come to the West. And there's many, many more. So you'll see lots of these other ones here. Yogananda here. Kundalini Yoga with Yogi Bhajan. Tibetan Yoga, the Dalai Lama, I believe, comes from that lineage. This would be the lineage of where I trained in Shoshone, this Muktananda lineage, Siddha Yoga, and even the Bhagavan Nityananda was the root guru of that. Actually, he came from India. And there were some other offshoots of this too. Several other offshoots that I know of, you know, so there's more, there's a lot more to this. But what we practice and vinyasa, and yeah, Bikram yoga is not even on here. But Krishnamacharya here is kind of the root of, so you can see on here we have Ashtanga yoga. And this is where this first little offshoot of the Krishnamacharya branch is where vinyasa comes from. So from the practice of Ashtanga vinyasa, then grew the practice of vinyasa. So when we have a, you know, it's said that when we know a little bit about where we come from, that then we can get a clearer picture of where we are, why we're here, and also where we're going. So some of you have practiced the Ashtanga series. Who's practiced the Ashtanga series, by the way? Who's done Ashtanga primary series before? What do you notice about it? What is the same about Ashtanga primary series and vinyasa sequencing? So we have what we learned yesterday, the half series, right? That comes from Ashtanga, right? That is the sun salutation that comes directly from Ashtanga. There are other sun salutations, and many of these other traditions have their own form of sun salutation. The one that we do is adapted from Ashtanga. So it's not the exact one they do in Ashtanga. They do some things differently. And there's some reasons, there's some very good reasons why we do things differently. Because there's some safety issues with like the way the half series was done. For example, we stressed, you know, the only bringing your upper arm to 90 degrees in Chaturanga, right? So your upper arm is parallel with the floor, right? In traditional Ashtanga, you bring the arm like way back. And so it puts all of this pressure on the shoulder, on the glenohumeral joint, and it causes scapular winging and all of that stuff we talked about yesterday not to do. So that's one of the reasons it's really different, but it does have the concept of flow. So a lot of traditional yoga practices, a lot of traditional asana practices have, like you hold the postures for a much longer time. So this is true of hot yoga. This is true of many traditions of hatha yoga. There are other traditions that incorporate flow. Bikram is, oh, is he under there? Okay. I don't see him on there. Thanks, Jenny. Bikram was on there somewhere. but yeah, so yeah, this concept of fluid movement, the kind of one breath, one movement thing that we do in vinyasa, and you know, in some of the postures, some of the ways that we've incorporated the postures into the sequence come from Ashtanga Vinyasa. So now, if you guys are ready, I'm going to confuse you even further. Because yoga sometimes, oh no, that's not the right one. All right, let me get the right file up here. There it is. Okay, so I'm going to give you guys some definitions here. So up here at the top, this is Ashtanga. This is how you spell it in the academic Sanskrit notation. We'll talk about that next week. And so I have two definitions for this word. One is the 8 limbs of yoga. So Ashta means 8 and Anga means limb in Sanskrit. The 8 limbs of yoga as outlined by Patanjali in the Yoga Sutras around 400 BCE. We did not learn, we will learn about these in the True Yoga Book Club. And number 2, so that's the actual, like, if you just take the word by itself, this is where we learn it first in yoga. This is where in yoga history, we learn the word Ashtanga first, 400 BCE, long, long before Pattabhi Jois. Ashtanga Vinyasa Yoga, a style of yoga as exercise created by K. Pattabhi Jois during the 20th century. The style is energetic, synchronizing breath with movements. The individual poses, or asanas, are linked by flowing movements, or vinyasas. So when we talk about Ashtanga as a practice of yoga, we're talking usually we're talking about this. We're talking about the Ashtanga Vinyasa, right? When you go to a yoga studio and you see, you look at a yoga studio schedule and you see Ashtanga on their schedule, you're going to assume that you're going to do this style of yoga, right? But I want to just make the difference known between like the actual meaning of the word and, you know, it's almost like, you know, you could take any word, like say I started a yoga studio and I wanted to call it, you know, Chakra Yoga Studio, right? And then everybody really got into it and it became the most popular yoga style and everybody's like, oh, have you done chakra yoga? When the word chakra actually means something, you know, that I named the style after. So that's what I'm trying to convey here. Does that make sense? Yeah, so it's got more than one, there's more than one meaning to it. There's kind of a root or original meaning, and then a meaning that's been adopted by, you know, the creators of a system of yoga, and then been more widely known within the world of yoga. All right, so now, I've got lots of screen shares today, you guys. And tell me if you want to look at any of these more, and I can always bring them back up. So now we have a little flow chart here. So we're starting at the top with, okay, first of all, who can tell me, let's put it in your chat box. What do you think the physical, never mind. I just wrote it right there. Hatha yoga is the physical practice of yoga, right? We'll talk about the branches of yoga. But you know, when we talk about bhakti yoga, the yoga of devotion, jnana yoga, the yoga of wisdom and learning, hatha yoga is the physical practice of yoga. So is, for example, what kind of yoga is vinyasa yoga? Is that hatha yoga? Yes, it is, because it's a physical practice of yoga. What about hot yoga? Hatha yoga? Thumbs up or down? Yeah, hot yoga. What about yin yoga? Yeah, right? Because even though it's really gentle, it's still physical. We're putting the body in these different shapes. So again, it's one of those kind of confusing terms. If I go to a yoga studio and I look at the schedule and I see Hatha Yoga class, I might make some assumptions. I might assume that it's a slower class, that it's a more gentle class, that we'll be holding the postures longer, but that really doesn't have anything to do with the original meaning of Hatha Yoga. It simply means the physical practice of yoga or the practice of asana. All right, so from Hatha Yoga, we've got lots of offshoots here, so I didn't name them. You saw a lot of them on the tree. It goes this way, it goes that way. But for our purposes, we're going to come down to Krishnamacharya. Krishnamacharya was an Indian master of asana. And he trained several people who ended up coming to the West and sharing those practices in the United States. Among them, Indra Devi, we talked about. BKS Iyengar. Anybody ever taken Iyengar yoga?
No.
Very alignment focused yoga, lots of props, really interesting practice, often used for therapeutic purposes. And then Desikachar was one person who brought yoga to the West, and the style of yoga that he started is Vini Yoga. Anybody ever take Vini Yoga? Also has some flowing sequences in it, but like these shorter flowing sequences, also with more of a therapeutic focus. And then Pattabhi Jois, who started Ashtanga Vinyasa, he trained these two folks, Beryl Bender Birch and Baron Baptiste, who both had forms of power yoga. And they both developed their own forms of yoga. And then those things kind of morphed into modern vinyasa over time, because just like everything else, yoga evolves. Anything in a culture is going to evolve and change over time, and different people are going to bring different flavors and different experiences to it. Modern vinyasa, also influenced by exercise science, and continues to evolve to meet changing needs and knowledge. So sometimes we, even since I've been teaching 11 years. Next month, actually, will be my 11th anniversary of regularly teaching yoga. I've been certified for about 16 years. And I taught a little bit in there, but really I've been teaching regularly for 11 years. And even in that short time span, there were ways that I was trained to teach that, like, now, the more we learn about the human body, it's like, oh, actually, we don't use that cue anymore because it encourages people to do things with their body that aren't particularly safe. So it's always evolving. And that's something perhaps that I would like you to take away from today. If you don't remember any of these names, dates, or lineages, know that the yogic practice is ever evolving. And as you teach, even though you might learn a certain way, be open to that change and let it evolve you and your teaching style, and let your teaching style evolve and your practice style, to best meet the needs of yourself, your students, and your community. So in modern vinyasa, some things that are different about it than our roots here in Ashtanga Vinyasa are the individual teachers have the freedom to adapt their teaching style. Right? So we're allowed to do that. We're allowed to change. We're allowed to say, you know what, I used to use this cue all the time. And based on what I know now, I've decided that this cue doesn't work super well anymore. An example I can give you is, we used to say, and you'd hear this cue a lot when you were in triangle pose. You guys know triangle? We'd say that you really wanted to make yourself as flat as possible and really stack the hips. And a cue we would say would be almost like you're between two panes of glass. Well, it's a terrible cue anyway. I don't want to be stuck between two panes of glass. That sounds awful. But basically what it was doing is it was encouraging people to press their top hip back in a way that was putting pressure on the hip and the SI joint that over time could cause injury. And so now we let it be okay for that hip to just kind of come forward a little bit. And we don't really cue that. So yeah, just in the last 11 years, that has changed, and that's no longer a widely used cue. I hear it every now and then, I do hear it. But if you keep up with things, and that's the other thing, you know, as you commit to this evolution, you kind of have to stay, you know, continue educating yourself, so that you know what the current research is and you know what modern knowledge says. So instead of being like, well, I do it this way because this is the way we've always done it, we have that ability and responsibility, arguably, to evolve.
So I have a question.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
So modern vinyasa, you know, it allows you guys, or allows us to adapt. Are there certain branches that are more historically like that don't change, that don't evolve, that they just stick with the postures the way they were 5,000 years or 2,000 years ago?
There are. There are those. There are many examples of, like, sometimes it's a set of postures, and Bikram yoga is one of them, actually. And now if you're a hot yoga teacher and you're not affiliated with the Bikram lineage, so for various reasons, which we'll also talk about that. So a lot of these lineage teachers who brought yoga to the West, and some of them still in India, there's a lot of controversy around them. And Bikram is one of those very controversial leaders. And some of you probably already have some idea about that. And for that reason, a lot of people have broken away from affiliating themselves with Bikram yoga per se. Now, if you teach Bikram yoga in like a licensed Bikram studio, you have to use a set script. You have to teach it a very certain way. Now, if you teach hot yoga, so if you train to teach hot yoga, but it's not Bikram affiliated, then, and some hot yoga trainings still use the script, and most of them still teach the 26 postures, but there's more freedom to change the way you cue things. There's more freedom to modify the postures for different needs of different bodies. But yeah, there are traditions where, and Ashtanga is one of them as well. If you take an Ashtanga class, I don't actually know if they use a script, but they do teach like that very set sequence, and they teach it a certain way. And there's a certain progression that you do to advance in the practice. Shivananda yoga is another example of a very set sequence, that it is the way that it is, and that's the way it's going to be. Some of you guys may have started reading Yoga Beyond Belief. Yoga Beyond Belief is written by Ganga White, who did a lot of his early study, and all of his early study in the Shivananda ashram. And he's got a lot to say about it. So you'll get to that in Yoga Beyond Belief. But we don't have to use a set script, right? Like you are learning a sequence. That's my next bullet point, is we're not ultimately bound to one sequence. So we give you a sequence in this training, and we give you some cues to start with, but you don't have to always use them, and we don't expect each person to always use the same cues every time. And we expect you to start to change those cues as they become more natural to you. We expect you to, as you really get that sequence down, after you finish the training and you've been teaching a little while, to start branching off of that sequence and adding different elements and changing the way that you teach it. When you take a vinyasa class with an experienced teacher, you'll probably notice that our sequencing often doesn't look a lot like the Cambio yoga sequence, even with teachers who trained at Cambio yoga. So you'll notice that their sequences really evolve. And so that's kind of fun, because you can be, it allows you more freedom as a teacher. It allows you to bring in some of your creativity. We can bring in other influences such as dance, Pilates, and other lineage styles. We can modify our classes to varying degrees of intensity to meet student needs. And the Western yoga industry has relatively universal ethical standards. And the two that are most commonly used, Yoga Alliance has a code of ethics. So if you are registered with Yoga Alliance, you're agreeing to abide by their code of ethics. And if they find that that code of ethics has been, you know, it hasn't happened a lot that I know of, but I know there are a couple instances where, you know, I think Bikram was one of them, where the Yoga Alliance affiliation was pulled from him because of ethical violations. And then the Cambio Code of Ethics that's in your manual comes from George Feuerstein. So Feuerstein's Code of Ethics for yoga teachers is a pretty common one for teachers and studios to reference. I bring that up because many of these lineages have some questionable things in their backgrounds. I mean, more than, there's some very unethical things more than questionable. Some really terrible things, some questionable things, and everything in between. And so that is an element of what we have to look at when we look at the history of yoga. Iyengar yoga, Bikram, hot yoga, and yoga therapy all have roots in the teachings of Krishnamacharya. So he was a very influential person. Yeah. All right. What questions do you guys have? You don't have to memorize any of that, by the way. I said if there's anything in particular that I'd like you to take away from all of that information is that the idea, you know, maybe the visual of the tree and this idea that yoga is not just one thing. As you know, as you go into, and you've probably experienced this already, like you tell somebody in your life, you're like, oh yeah, I'm really into yoga, or I'm taking this yoga teacher training, and they're like, oh yeah, so that's that thing where you do it in a really hot room, or so that's just breathing and stretching, right? They have some concept, some idea of what they think yoga is, and it's probably not entirely wrong. It's just that it's like, you know, there's just a lot more to it. It's like, yes, and yes, it is that, and it's also all of these other things, because it's a huge umbrella. It's a big tree with a lot of different roots and a lot of different branches. Yeah. So we got through that kind of fast.
I have,
What's up?
I have a question. So
Yes.
we are doing this whole chakra night. When do the chakras come into it?
Huh? Sorry, what was your question?
So when do the chakras come into it? When does that like?
Oh, when were the chakras first mentioned? Oh, that's a good question. You know, the chakras, where are they first mentioned? So of the eras, I don't know off the top of my head when the chakras are first mentioned, but I can probably access that information for you. They are old, right? They're older than, you know, they've been kind of adapted to this sort of new age world. The original chakras did not have this, you know, our Roji Biv rainbow colors. They did have colors associated with them, but they were different colors. So that the rainbow colors are a Western adaptation to the chakras. But they do go far back, yeah. In fact, an interesting thing about the chakras, when we take a break, I'll take a look in my chakra book. I do know that they show up in different cultures. So chakras don't just show up in yoga culture as comes from the Indus Sarasvati civilization. So archaeologists have found things like, you know, carvings in Native American archaeological sites that have like the chakras carved into them. So yeah, they show up all over the place. And Chinese medicine talks about the meridians, which are very similar in their focus as the chakras. So it's something that different cultures, different people in different cultures historically have come to that understanding of the human energy system through their own means. But yeah, that's a good question. I'll look that one up for you when we take a break. Other questions? Comments? All right, so I think what I'd like to do is, let's see, what else do I have to share? I think I have something else to share with you guys. Do I? All right, we looked at the tree. We looked at Ashtanga Vinyasa. Maybe I did, maybe we did look at everything. All right. So yeah, it's a lot of stuff, I realize. But, oh, I know what I want to look at again. Okay, let's look at this modern yoga timeline real quick. So I want to talk momentarily about, because I feel like, so let's say that we were learning about United States history. And I could talk about like the founding fathers and the Constitution and all of that stuff. But if I failed to mention slavery, you know, I think I would be doing a disservice. So, so I want to mention, this is always a tough one for me to talk about. So I have a dear friend that I texted this morning and I said, how do I tell them about like the abuses in the yoga industry without like ruining the yoga for them? And this is, I'm going to read this to you because this is what she texted back to me and I thought it was really beautiful. She said, even in ancient healing practices, humans are fallible and prone to abuse of power, even when they begin with the purest of intentions. This does not discredit the potential value of their work, but it does remind us of the need to be vigilant and to do the constant inner work of self-discipline, mindful discernment, and focus on truth. So that is from my friend Kirsten. Because when I looked through, as I was making this timeline and looking through it, I thought, well, so several of these people, Yogi Bhajan, this has just come out that Yogi Bhajan has allegation after allegation of sexual abuse. Bikram Chaudhry, as we know, if anybody's seen, there's a whole Netflix documentary about Bikram Chaudhry, and more than that, he's been convicted of all kinds of stuff and has fled the U.S. Now he's actually still teaching in Europe, but if he comes back to the United States, he will go to prison. Pattabhi Jois, who is one of the founders of our lineage, also tons and tons of allegations. It's very well documented. There's pictures of him. He was known for doing really sexually inappropriate adjustments. And like I'm actually reading a book right now by Matthew Remski. And you guys, I think you've either read it already or you're going to read the New York Times article. It's by Matthew Remski. And he's wrote a whole book about what happened in the Ashtanga community and how it was normalized, and people kind of saw what was happening, but they didn't really know what to do with that information, because they also had this beautiful magical practice of yoga that was bringing them all this goodness and healing. And so it's like this cognitive dissonance to think that these two things can exist side by side. And it's like, well, what do you do with that? And then Bhagavan Rajneesh, otherwise known as Osho. There's also a documentary about Osho. It's called Wild Wild Country. anybody's seen that. And that's just all kinds of crazy stuff. Osho himself wasn't known for abusing people, but it was a very cult-like thing that he started. And all kinds of crazy stuff happened with that, including people like getting murdered and poisoned and stuff like that. Dalai Lama, as far as I know, no scandals on his end. Thank goodness. Like, there's got to be somebody. But yeah, I just wanted to kind of address that. And it happens in modern yoga too. It's not just these big, leaders that are from other countries. That's not only where it happens. It also happens in the US. It happens in modern yoga studios. If you start reading about it, you'll be like, oh, this studio had a scandal, or this studio, and some of them are allegations, some of them are convictions. They're all different. But there's a lot of it out there. There's a lot of this kind of thing out there. And, it's like, it's hard to know if you're not there and you don't see it happening. So sometimes we don't know. Sometimes we're like, I don't know what's true or what's not true. But it's a challenging thing. And it can be hard for the heart of a yogi to process all that information. But yeah, I think, again, like my friend said, it doesn't discredit the potential value of the work and the healing potential of the practice is always there, because the actual yoga doesn't come from the teacher, right? The actual yoga is what happens inside of you. I have another person in my life who grew up in the Baha'i faith. And he told me that one of the Baha'i sayings is that you're supposed to follow the light and not the lamp. And I thought, well, that's another really beautiful and applicable thing, because the light's still there, like no matter what happens. Because it's easy when you learn something, you're like, oh, this teacher that I really believed in and followed has fallen from grace. It's really hard to be like, well, does that mean that I should reject all of the things? Do we throw the baby out with the bathwater question? And I think the answer is it's up to you. It's your practice and it's your choice of how you process that and how you deal with it. But the yoga itself, no matter how amazing the teacher is, no matter how amazing the practice or the community or any of these things are, your yoga actually is what's happening inside of you. And a teacher in integrity will tell you that it's not about them, that it's about you, right? My practice is about me. Your practice is about you. I'm just here to share the information that I have gained so that you can take it and do what you need with it. Yes, B.
I just want to say thanks for sharing that with us. I know it can be daunting, but I do think it's important, like, that we're aware of that aspect of the community, especially going into possibly being instructors ourselves, so that we can know to look out for things like that. And I just want to say I really liked that, following the light and not the lamp analogy, because regardless of what happened with the instructors of the past, we can all find our own meaning with the knowledge that they have put into our scope of accessibility. So.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I share that because I think, as you start learning more, you might see a documentary or you might see something in the news. In the last summer, just over last summer, there's one studio in Denver that had all sorts of scandals that closed, and there's one studio based it's a chain of studios that had all kinds of scandals with their founder that closed. And so, to know that, and I think I also bring it up for your own safety, I guess, because I want, you to know that you always, you know, and I say this in my class, I say your body belongs to you and your practice belongs to you. And, you know, I think I heard Morgan using kind of some of this language too, is that this is your practice and it's your experience. So, you know, teachers can give you, they can give you guidance, they can give you information, they can give you very helpful tips and things to help you with your alignment and your breath and your perspective and all kinds of different things. But ultimately, you're the authority on you, you're the authority on your experience and your body and your practice. And most importantly, is really that your body is always yours. And so just because you consented to receive adjustments doesn't mean that you have to continue to consent to receive adjustments if they make you uncomfortable in any way. You know, that sort of thing, I would like for you all to take away from that. And it also extends to psychological stuff too. So just as teachers are not, you know, not allowed to physically abuse their students, they're also not allowed to psychologically abuse or manipulate their students in any way. And you are always allowed to set boundaries around your time commitment, around your belief systems, around your participation or non-participation in something that, you know, doesn't align with, you know, your values. So you always have the right to do that. And any teacher that tells you otherwise, I think I would call that a very big red flag.
Thank you.
And I think that's all I have to say about that, unless you all have other questions or comments or anything you'd like to share. All right. Well, I actually expected that to take longer than it did. Maybe I didn't need to rush through it so much. But let's take a break. Actually, you know, let's stand up. Can we stand up? All right, so this is Sundays. Sundays tend to be the brainy days, right? Saturdays are physical days, right, with your posture clinics. You'll do some physical stuff on Sundays, but I really like to get you guys like a little movement. So let's just stand up, and first of all, make yourself really, really big. So just stretch yourself out. You don't need a yoga mat to do this or anything. Just get like as big as you can. Take up lots of space. It doesn't matter what size your body is, like spread your energy out and just really, really own the space around you and expand. Take a big breath in. Good, and now I'm gonna have you get really small in whatever way feels comfortable to you. So get really, really small. You can curl up in a little ball if you want to. You can even tuck your chin. You can close your eyes if that's comfortable. Give yourself a hug. Just kind of draw your energy in. Now, we're going to stand up again. We're just going to kind of get like medium. Just be medium. Right? You don't have to be big or small. You can just be for a moment. Right? And kind of shake out your shoulders. Shake your shoulders out, let your arms just be really loose. And then shake out your hips, bend and straighten your knees. And then shake out your head. And then just shake everything out. You kind of jump around if you want to. Maybe you shake it out in a circle. Maybe let your circle go the other way. All right, and then take a great big stretch up and feel energy moving up from the soles of your feet, up your legs, up your spine, up through the crown of your head, up through your fingertips. And now bring your arms down. Let's take a grounding movement. So palms down, press energy down, and feel energy moving down into the earth. Take a big breath in, bring the arms up. And then pause, retain the breath at the top. Take in one more little sip of air. And then on your exhale, let it go with a sigh. All right. And just shake it out for a moment. I'm going to give you guys, because I might talk a little more about history, and then we're going to do Sankalpa and Vikalpa. And I know you guys are supposed to be with Amber this afternoon, but you're actually with me, as it turns out. So I get to see you all for a little bit longer. So lucky me. I think let's take a 20-minute break. So you guys have some time to, again, get a snack, go to the bathroom, take care of yourself. It's a long intellectual day. So take a 20-minute break. We will come back at 1:35. 1:35.
What
All
are we
right.
doing when we come back?
What's that?
What are we doing when we come back? I missed it.
When we're gonna, if there's anything else we need to assimilate about history of yoga, we'll do that. And then we'll move into Sankalpa and Vikalpa.
Okay, thank you.
So there is a lot more, that was like a really quick and dirty history of yoga. There's so much more, you saw how big the tree was, how big the branches are, and each of those lineages, each of those histories has, a huge, it has like a huge umbrella of its own, and all of the different subsets of all of the different things. And it's still growing. It's growing all the time. So, and you guys are actually part of that growth, because you're going to go out and teach, and you're going to learn things from different lineages. You're going to learn things from different practices, and you're going to bring those into your teaching, and then it's just going to branch out more and more and more from there. So it's a constant evolution. It's a constant growth process. And just like anything else, when you have something with this, 5,000 years of history, there's going to be good, there's going to be bad, there's going to be everything in between. And so that's, it's not, sometimes I think we think of yoga as like, oh, it's all good all the time. And, really we have a lot of challenges. Even in the modern yoga world, we have challenges, and some of those challenges aren't even, like abuse issues or anything, but it's just like, well, what's the right way to teach? Or how do we, you were just doing inclusion with Morgan. How do we evolve to become more inclusive and more socially just? How do we evolve to make sure that yoga is accessible for everyone, but teachers get compensated fairly? These are all things that we're all in the process of working through them. So we're working through them together. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's no black and white. There's nothing where you can be like, well, this is all good and it's all perfect, and so everything that comes from this is going to be really good. Because I think that's when people get into trouble and they fall into those abusive situations, is when they really attach themselves so much to one theory, or particularly one teacher, just because a teacher has. And we'll talk about this more in the Yoga Sutras. We can master things, we can master practices, and some of those practices can give us these almost sort of magical qualities. This is what you see with some of the really charismatic leaders. But that doesn't mean that we're a master of like the yoga in a big sense, right? It means that, you might have some sort of amazing or even magical, or appearing magical skill, but it doesn't mean that a teacher has like a magical, it doesn't mean that they're always right, or that they aren't fallible to some of the downfalls of just human nature in general. So yeah, there's a lot to it, and there are books. Someone asked me for one reference book, and I don't really have a one reference book on the history of yoga, because what I would say is when if you read a history of yoga book, know that modern scholars have changed. Like, they used to think yoga was much younger than it is now. So some of the older books are not as up to date. And yeah, I'll take a look because I'd like to find a more modern book too. Some of the things I learned in my trainings, I've learned a lot through trainings. I learned a lot through articles. I love Yoga International, has really fantastic articles. Another media source that I like, Embodied Philosophy, has a lot of really cool articles and podcasts, and they tend to stay really current with what the current research is. I like Yoga International or Embodied Philosophy. Yoga Journal is okay. Yoga Journal tends to be a little more like the mainstream culture of yoga, but they do sometimes have some interesting articles and good introductions to things. So, but those are some places that you can start learning. And once you start learning again, it's like this huge tip of the iceberg thing where you're like, whoa, I could go this direction or that direction, because every lineage has its own history and all kinds of stuff. So yeah, and we will learn more about different types and branches when we do the True Yoga book club. We will learn about, we'll start talking about the Yoga Sutras. And we have True Yoga book club. Let's see, does anybody know off the top of their head when that is supposed to be? Is it next week? It'll be the week after. Next week is Sanskrit and chanting. So it's not for a while. Wait, we have Yoga Beyond Belief is on October 18th. So when is True Yoga?
I think it was October 8th.
October, oh, it's a Thursday, that's why. Okay, there it is. So yeah, read True Yoga for October 8th. And then we have, and then the next week, October 18th, is Yoga Beyond Belief. I will tell you guys just a heads up, True Yoga is a relatively easy read for most people. So the concepts are kind of big, but they're simplified in a way that it doesn't make them too hard to process. Yoga Beyond Belief is a little more dense. So give yourself time with that knowledge to read Yoga Beyond Belief, because it's got a lot more like Sanskrit vocabulary in it. It takes a little more time to get through. So that's just so you guys can plan accordingly for your reading, knowing, taking into account your reading style and your learning style. Okay, any last questions about history of yoga before we move on? Okay, awesome. So we're going to talk now about Sankalpa and Vikalpa. So this is one of your first Sanskrit lessons. So a lot of these words, these vocabulary words, come from the Sanskrita, which is one of the reasons that we learn Sanskrit in yoga teacher training. It's not because we don't expect you to speak it to your students or anything like that, and you don't even have to use it while you teach. But when you have a basic understanding of some of these words and some of these roots, it'll help you understand the stuff that you read, and that's one of the reasons that you learn some Sanskrit. So san. Anytime you hear the word san or the sound san, it has something to do with truth. So you will learn san or sat. Both of those have to do with truth. So Satnam is I am truth, right? Satya, you'll learn in True Yoga, is the yogic concept of honesty. San, you guys probably learned the word Sangha, your true community. And then Kalpa is vow. So a Sankalpa is a true vow of sorts. All right, I'll bring this back up in a moment. So if a Sankalpa is a true vow, it has to do with intention, but it's a little bit more than intention. So who's ever made a New Year's resolution? Who's like really, really rocked and followed through with their New Year's resolution? Right, a couple people, right? It takes a lot of willpower, right? And maybe you did some things. Maybe you made it more like a sankalpa. So the root of a New Year's resolution is I will, I am going to, right? And the problem with I will and I'm going to, and there's been neurological studies on this, is that when we say I will or I'm going to, our brain tells us that's in the future. And so mentally and psychologically, we give ourselves permission to put it off. So when we set a sankalpa, we're going to say, I am, or I do, and we put it in the now and in the present time. So it's as though it is already true. So it's an I am or an I do statement. There are a couple of different meanings to sankalpa in the yogic tradition. In some lineages, a sankalpa is something that's given to you by a teacher or a guru, and then it's a practice that you devote yourself to. So your teacher might say, for example, do 10 sets of sun salutations every morning at 5:30 a.m. And so that might be somebody's sankalpa. And they do it until their teacher has told them that their sankalpa is complete. So that's one form of sankalpa. The kind of sankalpa that we're going to work with is one that you'll set yourself. And there are two kinds of this sankalpa. It helps if you refer to yourself in third person. Interesting. So the two forms are, one is a heart's desire, right? Now we did this in our first chatter follows. My heart's desire is, right? So you might go back to what you wrote in that chat box. What is your heart's desire, right? I want to help people feel better in their bodies. But if you're writing it as a sankalpa, I help people feel better in their bodies. Or it can be a specific intent. And this is like a form of goal setting. So I help people feel better in their bodies is very broad in general, right? Maybe I teach a yoga class every week or something like that. Would be a more specific goal. So you can choose whether you want your sankalpa to be broad or specific. Again, clear and present language. And some people write really long sankalpas. If that is your style, you can have more than one thing present. I really love working with I usually have one or two statements in my sankalpa, one or two sentences, and that's it. Because that's a lot for the brain to focus on. Then there's something called a vikalpa. And a vikalpa, so V, as you can see here, is sort of like opposite or anti, right? So when you see V as a prefix on a word in Sanskrit, you can assume that it's like, and it doesn't actually always makes a word negative, but it just means that it's not something. It's something that it's not. So a vikalpa is anything that works against your sankalpa. So as you're setting your sankalpa, and we'll do this exercise here in a moment, as you're setting your sankalpa, you will also take note of any vikalpas that might get in your way. And this might be a mistaken belief that you have about yourself. Right? A lot of times they're rooted in, either worthiness, right? The sense that I'm not good enough, or I don't deserve it, or fear of failure, right? I'm afraid that I won't be able to do it. Sometimes fear of success. What if I do succeed? What am I going to do with myself then, right? So as you're setting your sankalpa, you will also cultivate an awareness of any potential vikalpas that might get in your way so that you can be aware of them as they come up. And all of this ties together with the concept of dharma. Now, dharma comes from this root here, dra, which means to hold, to establish, or to support. So in essence, dharma might literally translate to that which holds everything together. Now, we often talk about dharma as sort of like your destiny or like your fate, but it's really like finding your life's purpose or your life's path. And the good news is you don't have to find your whole life's purpose today in this workshop. But setting a sankalpa and really tuning into the heart's desire can be a step towards discovering that. And you may not, it's like it's always going to evolve, right? And what's your dharma right now may not be your dharma in 3 years. We're allowed to change directions and to let that change of directions be part of our dharma as well. So when we are walking in our dharma, we are walking in alignment with our truth. We are walking in alignment with our own values and our own sense of purpose in the world. When we're walking in our dharma has very little to do with what other people expect from us. It has nothing to do with what other people expect from us. So this is not the expectations of your family or your culture or your society, but rather your own value system. If that happens to be in line with those things, then that can still be your dharma. But it comes, again, it's kind of like part of the yoga, right? The real yoga happens inside of you, and your dharma is your own, and nobody else can really tell you what it is. So sometimes it's more convenient if somebody else will just tell us what to do, right? But we have to do the work. All right. Sometimes the Buddha uses the term of dharma, and the term sometimes refers to the teachings of the Buddha as dharma. The modern sage, Sri Aurobindo, another one of those yogis, that was, we didn't talk about him in history, but he's one that we didn't mention. Dharma is both that which we hold to and that which holds together our inner and outer activities. And in its primary sense, it means a fundamental law of our nature, which secretly conditions all our activities. And in this sense, each type, species, individual group has its own dharma. So sometimes, it can kind of come down to those nature versus nurture questions too. And so I'm not saying which it is not, but last night I was hanging out with a friend, and they have a daughter the same age as my daughter. They're both 12, and they couldn't be more opposite people. So it's like, my daughter is like really quiet, really introverted. She likes to write. She creates these really complicated and in-depth worlds with her toys and her writing and long storylines and stuff like that. And her friend that we were hanging out with is really super extroverted, and you could tell as soon as we got there, her friend is like, "Hey, River, oh my gosh, you're here." She's jumping up and down and going crazy, and River's like, "Hey, what's up?" And I thought it's so funny because, as parents, they're not just like us either. And they've been like that since they were as little as I think maybe 4 or 5 when they met. And they've always been like that. And so I thought, well, they just have really different dharmas, the personalities that emerge from us as we grow up, those things that our parents don't give us, or maybe they're in our DNA from our parents or something. But all of that is part of our dharma. So we will do a little practice to get ready for our sankalpa exercise. And then we'll take a minute and just go kind of alone for a minute and write a sankalpa for ourselves. So we'll start with just a little meditation on this so that we can get centered. This is another thing, is that maybe we can get out of our heads for a moment. So instead of thinking like, okay, what's my sankalpa? What do I need to do? What do I want to accomplish? Let's just pause and see if we can tune into the heart. So we'll start with a Pali Mudra. And this is the mudra, the gesture of shelter. And it is for cultivating trust in your own inner guide. So Pali Mudra, the gesture of shelter, for cultivating trust in your own inner guide. So we'll start by just crossing your fingers, right? And then you'll bring your thumbs and your ring fingers together. So your first two fingers cross, just like you're doing crossed fingers. And then thumbs and ring fingers come together. Just like that, yeah. And then you can rest them down on your lap with the palms up. And just take a moment to check in with yourself. You can close your eyes if you like. Tune into your breath. Now, if your mind feels really busy, I will invite you to use a mantra. This is a nice simple mantra, the mantra of the natural breath. On the inhale, you silently repeat to yourself, hum. And on the exhale, sa. This mantra is said to make the sound of the natural breath. And it translates to, I am not. And as you breathe in and out, hum on the inhale, sa on the exhale. In your mind's eye, follow your breath. If your mind becomes distracted, bring your attention back to the natural breath. And now hold a gentle focus in the heart center. And then when you feel ready, bring your attention back to the body and the space that you're in. If your eyes are closed, you may gently open them. And bring your hands to Anjali Mudra. And so from this quiet place, we will take a few moments. You can turn your video off if you like. And let's take about 5 to 7 minutes to write your sankalpa. So it is a short statement, or it could be short in simple language in the present tense. Okay, does everybody have a Sankalpa? So our next, oh, sorry, I'm not, you can't see me. All right, I'm still here, I promise. Okay. So, let's see. Now I know Corey is just listening today. Tori and Jenny, are you guys here today? Okay, I'm just checking in. We're gonna go into some groups is why I'm asking. So I want to make sure that if you are having a just listening day, that I honor that and I don't put you in a pair. So we're gonna go now into groups of 2 or 3. And here's your assignment and your groups. We're going to take about just 5 minutes, not too long, just 5 minutes, and share with your, you might be in a group of 2, just share with your partner or partners your sankalpa that you came up with. And share what do you think will be a vikalpa for you? What will be your biggest obstacle? So we have 3 things. Share your sankalpa, share your vikalpa, what will be your biggest obstacle? And share one thing that you might do to overcome that obstacle. So just one thing. You don't have to list all the things, but sankalpa. What might get in the way of your sankalpa? And what might you do to counteract that vikalpa or that thing that might get in the way? All right. So just 5 minutes and we create. I'm going to do these manually. Okay. You're randomly assigned
I have a quick question.
You bet.
For the Vikalpa, how should that be worded? Like you said, for the example before, like I help people. What would your Vikalpa sound like for something like that?
Right. The vikalpa doesn't have to be as specifically worded.
Oh, okay.
Just maybe like, if there's an underlying limiting belief, something like, who am I to help? Who am I to think I could help people? Or something like that.
Right.
Or I'm afraid that I might fail in helping people.
Okay. Thank
I
you.
heard somebody instead. I don't know. Whatever it
Yeah.
is. It doesn't have to be any specific wording. Okay. Here we go. All right. We'll see you guys in 5. Beautiful music. So beautiful. just don't know. I'm struggling. It's ridiculous because there's so much. I feel terrible. Just don't feel great. I'll be doing this.
I'm sorry, Katie.
It always happens so fast.
It
You
does.
know?
All right. So next thing we're going to do now, we're going to go into bigger rooms. So now Well, actually, you know what? Let's not do that. Let's just now share with. Let's just share with the group. We have a small enough group today. So let's go around, and how do you guys feel about sharing with the group? Does everybody feel okay about that? If you would like to opt out, I will welcome you to opt out. That's absolutely respected. Otherwise, if you don't mind sharing with the group, at least share your Sankalpa, and then if you're comfortable sharing your Vikalpa, and then what you might do to change your Vikalpa, or to, you know, to not let that affect you. All right. So I'm just gonna go in order here. We'll start with Max.
Hey, alrighty. So I wrote a couple down, but the one that I began with was just dieting, being better about my dieting, you know, following a better diet. I feel like just to take care of myself from the inside out. I feel like when I'm stressed or when I'm in a certain type of mood, I just eat garbage, you know, it's just kind of what I do. So I'm trying to be more active in like cutting out meat, cutting out dairies, you know, not eating anything processed, just, you know, fresh greens, fresh grains, things of that nature. And the sacrifices behind that would just be like convenience, you know, there wouldn't be any convenient options for me left and right. What else to do? Like meal prepping, so that will definitely take more time out of what I could be doing other things, you know, running or whatever activity, watching TV, just being lazy. So kind of dumbed it down to procrastination with the help of Trinidad. She was my partner there. So she was like, yeah, it's like procrastination. I was like, yeah, you're right. Absolutely. So that's definitely my goal, or a big goal right now. Just dieting, being better about it, treating myself better, especially during like the yoga teacher trainings. I feel like it's such a hand-in-hand thing to be good to yourself inside and out, as well as feed your brain, what we're doing right now. So that's that.
Very cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
Kayla's next.
So my Sankalpa was, I am happy and successful. And I was telling Katie that I think that like throughout my whole life, I always had this idea of you have to have, there's like a defined method to becoming happy and successful. And like, what do you want to be when you grow up? And you have to pick like defined careers, things like that. And it's always stressed me out, especially because I spent most of my life working in restaurants and no one looks at that as a real job. So my Vikalpa would be probably along the lines of just like self-doubt or fear of failure or judgment, that I'm not doing happiness and success the right way. And what I'm going to do to counter that is just trust myself and be confident knowing that I'm dictating happiness and success my way, and it's going to work out for me. I think that's it.
Perfect. Thank you. Jenny is next, if you'd like to go.
Right. So I'm not quite sure if I did it correct because mine's pretty long. But I have so many things that I am hoping to work on like through the course of all this that it just ended up being long. So it was, I am fully present, accepting of myself and others, patient and strong. I help myself and others find peace and bliss. And my V was, I literally just finished writing, well, who am I to help others? And then you said that. So I was like, oh, it's funny. It's exactly what I was writing down. So.
That's a common one. So that's why it came up. Awesome. Thank you. That's perfect. Diana.
So my Sankalpa was, I am an instrument of peace through my words, my thoughts, and my actions. And my Vikalpa is fear and reactivity. I was telling Caleb and Christian, I tend to have zero poker face whatsoever. So when something happens, you can see my reaction right away. and that can shut people down. So what I want to do to help with that is to breathe before reacting.
Perfect. Thank you. Katie?
So my Sankalpa is I am present and open to life's experiences. And then my Vikalpa is kind of getting up in my head about all the things that I have to get done and like the level of not perfectionism, but like high expectations that I place on myself to get those things done. So I've noticed that like sometimes a coworker will come in to ask me a question and I'm like on my computer going, I gotta get this done for my plan period or whatever. And then the coworker leaves and I was like, oh my gosh, I like completely just dismissed their problem. So I want to work on like catching myself when I do it. And then also like set aside the time and know like it's okay to take these 2 minutes here and like maybe I'll get them back later and maybe I won't. And either way, that's fine.
Wonderful. All right. Trinidad.
Okay. Oh, am I mute? No. You can hear me, right? Okay, cool. My Sankapa is I am authentic, happy, and balanced in this new life path that I have placed myself in. And then I wrote also that I can hear the voice, the guidance voice, so I don't get in the middle. My V kappa is, it will be the fear of the unknown, and that's it. And receiving kind of the gift and the knowledge, just so I can keep going in this new adventure.
Beautiful. Thank you. Caleb, are you wanting to participate? I see you're chilling there. Okay.
Is it okay to lie down?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's fine.
All right. I just felt like lying down. I'm listening though. I'm here,
This is
participating.
adult education, so I'm not here to be like, no doodling, right? You do whatever helps you learn best.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, mine's pretty simple. It's just like less time on electronics and like escaping. I guess that would be my V. Or wait, yeah. So my Sankalpa is less time like escaping, like just kind of shutting out, movies, Netflix, that sort of thing. Less time on electronics, and more time in my studies and books. And yeah, that's really it. So like just setting times up, I guess, scheduling even down to like the hour for my days and being really intentional. Yeah.
Cool. Very good. All right. B is next.
So my Sankalpa is I release myself from fear. I am courageous and joyful. And I think my Vikalpas will just kind of come down to the behaviors that I've been taught over my life about how like I'm not worthy of respect, or doomed for failure and things like that. But to combat it, I want to do more check-ins with myself and make sure I spend time to come back to like who I am at my core, and yoga and meditation is super, super helpful to me with that. Because I think like the more quiet time I spend with myself, that's what empowers me to go out and be myself in the world, because I'm reminded of who I am. So
Very good. Perfect. Thank you. Christian.
So for my Sankalpa, I wrote, I teach what I learn. And the via culpa, the things that I think might get in the way of that would be mostly isolation, is what I kind of came down to. And so just limiting the people I can interact with. And to avoid that, I will attempt to maintain those connections, keep facilitating connections with other people.
Perfect. Thank you. Tori.
My Sankalpa is I am growing, and I'm growing in the way that I'm meant to be. My Vikalpa is mostly rooted in self-doubt and not meeting my own expectations for where and when I'd like to grow. And to kind of counter that is just accepting that where I am is where I'm meant to be. And just because one aspect may be growing faster doesn't mean that a slower growing aspect is, sorry, right by a busy street, and that happens quite a bit. There's a lot of motorcycle traffic. Just accepting that any type of growth pattern or any type of growth is good.
Beautiful. Thank you. And no worries. I have I try to keep it quiet, but between the cats and the kids, it's like, I don't know if you guys heard me yesterday, it's like, you guys stop it, I'm teaching. They're like, oh, sorry.
I like hearing your cats meow in the background.
and then they always seem to choose the worst times. I'm like, guys, they're like, then I'll get off the call and they're like all quiet. All right, we have Flo next.
So for my Sankalpa, I put down, I like to help others find safety, to feel grounded, and enable deeper connections. And my Vikalpa is just my own personal concerns and biases, and I'm always afraid to offend others, but I'm almost hypersensitive to that, to the point where I don't say something when I can and I could. So just teaching myself to allow myself to express those things, and not to hold back quite so much to the point where it inhibits me.
Very good, thank you. So those are all really beautiful sankalpas. This is a tool that you can work with. One thing is that your sankalpa is allowed to evolve, just like your yoga practice will evolve and your teaching practice will evolve. So it's allowed to evolve, as your needs change, you can change your sankalpa. But you can work with a sankalpa, and one way you can work with it that can be really powerful is to repeat it. So it's kind of like an affirmation, but it's a little more powerful than an affirmation, because it's like, this comes from your heart's desire. This is like your true, your true vow to yourself. So you can repeat this to yourself any time throughout your day, but a time when it's really helpful is at the beginning and the end of a practice. You can repeat it to yourself once. You can repeat it to yourself 3 times. I do 3 times because I think that repetition is key. So you can repeat it, like say before you start maybe your asana practice, maybe before you start practicing the sequence. If you have a meditation practice, do it before you at the beginning of your meditation practice, and then do it again at the end to close your practice. So you're sort of sealing your practice in with your sankalpa by putting it at the beginning and at the end. So any kind of practice that you do. You can also do it first thing when you wake up in the morning. Just say it to yourself. This is something that takes like barely any time at all, right? Just to repeat a statement to yourself. And then repeat it again to yourself before you fall asleep at night. So that's your homework, is to pick a time or times that you repeat your sankalpa to yourself. And then if you find yourself getting frustrated, if you notice you're like, oh, I am starting to, that fear is coming up for me again, and I'm not sure, maybe I'm really not good enough, or I don't know, maybe I'll just, say screw it and watch the YouTube video or whatever. Whenever that happens, repeat your sankalpa to yourself at that time too, when you feel like you're about to, not do the thing that you vowed to do. right? And then the last bit is that when you do fall off the wagon and you make a mistake and you're like, oh, I said I wasn't going to eat the chocolate cake and I ate the chocolate cake because it was just there in the fridge and it was too easy. Give yourself grace. This is a journey. This is not a destination that you have to be at any particular given point in time. So we are doing the best we can under the circumstances that we're given with the tools that we have. And that is the best that anybody can do. So give yourself grace in the process. Give yourself grace in the process of teacher training. And nobody expects you to have the sequence memorized this week or anything like that. This is all just a journey, and let the journey be the thing, you know? Like, yeah, we have goals, but we're gonna also kind of let go of our attachment to those goals, even as we work towards them. This is an interesting thing that we do in yoga. So, awesome. Do you guys have any questions about Sankalpa, Vikalpa, Dharma, history? I know it's, oh yes, B.
So I guess I was just a little bit confused about the concept of Dharma. So you said it was kind of like your life's purpose, and also kind of like your personality. Is it just like the core of you, or I'm just a little confused?
Yeah, no, good question. You know, I think your Dharma is sort of like who you are meant to be and the path that you are meant to walk. And when we are acting in line, you know, in the yogic text, it would say, you know, it says that when we're acting in line with our Dharma, then like things are as they should be. And then when we're acting against our Dharma, you know, when we are, you know, succumbing to maybe temptations or something like that that are outside of our life's goal, or that are not in alignment with our core values, then that's called adharmic, and things start to go wrong from there. Now, it doesn't mean everything's perfect when you're walking in line with your Dharma. Dharma doesn't mean that there's not challenge along the way. But yeah, I would say, I guess maybe I confused you with my example about my daughters and her friend, but I think it was that because they're such different people, they have different dharmas in the world. And so I have these two young women who have a lot of the same interests. Like they're both like doing stand-up comedy, and they're both very funny, but like the way that it comes through each of them is like totally different. You know, and similarly, like the way that the teaching of yoga will come through each of you is going to be very different, because you all have a different dharma as teachers. And so it's not that it's your personality, but that your personality is sort of a part of the channel for your dharma. Right. So if I try to have somebody else's personality as I was teaching, it wouldn't work, and my teaching wouldn't be very effective. So I have to really embrace my own authentic voice as a teacher in order to channel the teaching of yoga well. Does that clarify a little bit?
Yeah, kind of like the traits that you're given are your strengths towards your purpose. So like with your daughter and her friend, they both want to be in comedy, but they have different perspectives on how they're funny. So yes.
Yeah, and it's like the way they are. So like the way she does it, the way my daughter does it, it wouldn't work for her friend, you know, and vice versa. And I think as teachers, it's a similar thing, you know. And maybe one teacher's dharma is to teach more spiritual aspects of yoga. Maybe another teacher's dharma is to teach more physical aspects of yoga, and maybe maybe it's more like towards physical healing. You know, maybe one teacher has a really lively and comedic presentation in the way that they teach, and maybe another teacher has a more inward and meditative style of teaching. And none of those things are either good or bad, but that's your dharmic path to find, like what's your voice as a teacher. And likewise, your students, you know, their dharma is to find the teacher that suits their needs best. And so that's why there are so many different kinds of us, because people all need different kinds of things. So it's a beautiful thing that we're all different and that we all have our own voice and our own path to walk as teachers. Yeah, dharma is it's kind of a challenging concept, I think. But if I were to give it one word, it's not one word, one phrase, we'll give it one phrase. It would be your life's purpose, your true path, right? Your authentic path. All right. So we have just a tiny bit of time yet. I think what I'm thinking is, what do you guys think? Do you guys just want to go chill? Are you done? Or would you like to go through some of the posture stuff from yesterday? We could do something called popcorn, where you go through just breath and cue. So it's not like you don't actually have to do the whole sequence. We're not going to break into breakout groups and do practice teaching or anything. But if we do this style, what I would do is I'll number you guys off. So like, let's say Max is 1. He's going to say, come down to child. I'll say come down to child's pose. And then Max will say, inhale to table. And then let's say Kayla's 2, she'll say exhale to cat. If Jenny's 3, she'll say inhale to cow. And then if Caleb's 4, he'll say exhale, downward facing dog. And then we'll just continue on from there. So that gets you that kind of like breath, pose, breath, pose, breath, pose in order all the way around. Thumbs up if that sounds good to you. All right, and then you're done. Then you're done for the weekend. Then you don't have to come back to Zoom until Tuesday, unless you do have to come back to Zoom before Tuesday, but not for yoga teacher training. All right. So I'm going to number you guys off, and I will do it. I will do it right here, so that you have a visual. That sometimes helps. And if somebody gets stuck, you can like jump in and be like, you know, it's inhale, walk your feet to your hands, right? You may use your notes if you need them. I'm not going to tell you can't use your notes. So, okay. All right, so I'm going to number you guys off. If, you're welcome. I think it would help your comrades to put your number on your screen. So let's go ahead and just replace your name with a number. I'm not suggesting that you guys are numbers.